Morning, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Behavioral Sciences Exempt Setting Committee. Today is June 8th, 2018. The time now is 8:38 a.m. And we're at the hearing room of in Sacramento of Department Consumers Affairs building. So let's establish a quorum. So Christina?
Morning. Christina Wong.
Yes.
Deborah
Here.
Brown.
Here.
Betty Conley.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. So let's do introduction. So shall I start? Let's start with, on my right-hand side, Sabina.
Sabina Knight, Legal Counsel.
Steve Sodergren, Assistant Executive Officer of the Board.
Kim Madsen, Executive Officer for the Board.
Christina Wong, LCSW member.
Deborah Brown, public member.
Betty Conley, LEP member.
Christy Berger, regulatory analyst.
Roseanne Helms, legislative analyst for the board.
So for our public, your introduction is welcome, but it's voluntary. So if you come up and if you choose to do so, come up, speak in the microphone, and tell us your name and your organization.
Good to see everybody. Jerry Shapiro. I teach in the School of Social Work at San Francisco State. So I'm really glad to see everybody.
Thank you very much. So I think we can start the agenda. So the first agenda item is the discussion and possible recommendations regarding registrant employment by temporary staff agencies. And it's Christy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So at our past two meetings, we talked about registrants gaining experience when their employer is a temporary staffing agency, and then they're placed at an agency that provides mental health services. And we're seeing this more often, so we needed to address it because our law doesn't work when the employer is a temp agency in some ways. So we looked at some language the last meeting, and I was asked to make a little bit of a change to make it more flexible about the locations where services are provided. So I want to point it out to you. I should have double underlined this section. I did it in red, but then you can't see it on your printout. So what I changed was, it had said before in C1, that the applicant shall only perform mental health and related services at the place where the contracting agency permits business to be conducted, is what was added. Because the concern was where the contracting agency regularly conducts business was not flexible enough when you have people providing services at, or meeting a client at an unusual location, because that's where the client is most comfortable. So this addresses the rest of the law and just makes that tweak that would make it more flexible in that way.
So that's the really minor change that, coming from the last meeting.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So any discussion from a board member? No, sounds good. Now, I just have one small thing. Now, so in A2, no, C2, actually, so the term written agreement is standard, right? So that's so that's the terminology we use.
Our written agreement, letter agreement, they're interchangeable.
Okay. Right, but that's understandable that is the, the agreement the supervisor, an outside supervisor should obtain before starting clinical supervision.
It's the agreement where it's between, how do I want to, boy, I need more
It's
coffee.
like a 3-point.
So I'm working at your agent, Steve has placed me in your agency, and so it's the agreement between you and
the agency. Right.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Just clarification, I was just thinking
yeah.
about the term, that's, because written agreement, is a little broad, but I think, if it's a standard thing that's being used in our language, and that's okay.
Yeah, because it's referring back to the regs that talk about it and that explains it more. So,
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So now, let's see. So we discussed, so what would be, so we actually need a motion today.
Yeah.
Right?
If you
Okay.
like- if you like
If we
this
like the
language.
language, we need a motion today. But before we go forward, any public comments in regards of this recommendation, this language? I see None. Great. Well, okay, now,
I'm happy to make a motion.
okay. And I'll second it. So what would be the motion?
The motion.
I know, I was like, wait a minute, you need a motion.
What would be the motion?
That you're going to recommend this language be considered
Be
for the board?
adopted, yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right. So we have first, we have second. Any other discussion? Okay. I guess we're ready for roll call.
Christina Wong,
Yes.
Deborah Brown, Betty Conley,
Yes.
motion carries.
Thank you so much. Okay, so the next discussion item is the practice setting definitions.
Yes. So, as you know, our committee, we've conducted two major surveys. One was of the practicum placement coordinators, and then we also did a exempt and private practice setting survey to get more information about all types of work settings, but with a focus on exempt settings, so that we could get a little more information, since we don't regulate those types of settings. So after the committee looked at the results, and as well as some additional information, there was some interest in creating definitions that would help us clarify those acceptable practicum settings for students, and to make some efforts to protect consumers who are receiving therapy from unlicensed or unregistered therapists who are not pursuing licensure in these exempt settings. So right now, we do have a definition for exempt settings. And so the three, again, are nonprofit and charitable, schools of any type, whether public or private, government and government agencies, churches and religious organizations that meet certain federal requirements are also considered nonprofit and charitable, so they meet that exempt setting definition. But I want to talk about how we might add something to the definition that may help to protect consumers. This piece doesn't really do anything for the student practicum issue. This is more about what can we do for consumers in a setting that we don't regulate, who are seeing a therapist that we don't regulate. Because that was that was sort of our main purpose for starting up this committee, and to take a look at that. And some of these settings do have oversight by other entities. If you're a government agency, of course, there's built-in oversight. If you're a school, especially a public school. But the nonprofit and charitable settings and private schools, we realize that there's not as much oversight. So, we, as the committee looked at the survey results, and staff had met with some nonprofit agencies, and, we gathered some information that the committee seemed to agree that in most cases, consumers are being adequately protected in exempt settings. These nonprofit clinics, we found that they do typically fingerprint. They provide training and supervision for unlicensed therapists, and they also have a complaint process for consumers. But we did find that there are a small, it's not an insignificant number. You've got 16% that don't have, or that don't fingerprint employees. They don't all have a licensee supervising their unlicensed and unregistered staff, and some don't have a consumer complaint process. So the committee expressed some interest in what we might be able to do to address those agencies where it might be lacking. The real difficulty here is that we don't regulate agencies, and it's not someplace, it would limit our ability to enforce any requirements placed on it. I guess limit isn't really the right word. We wouldn't be able to enforce them. But we did discuss some efforts that we could make that, I kind of described in here that might be mostly symbolic. You can put a law on the books relating to exempt settings, and there are a lot of laws like that out there. We have some that have to do with schools, although where we have the control is maybe with some of the student, issues. So it's kind of, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, just because we can't regulate agencies and the law wouldn't have any teeth, it doesn't mean we can't do something that would encourage agencies to follow. Because most of the time, I think the agencies and individuals, they try to follow a law that's on the books. So while it may not have teeth, it may help provide for some consumer protection. So what we discussed in the office is that one thing that might help is if we require any unlicensed or unregistered therapists who aren't pursuing licensure and you're working in an exempt setting to provide consumers with some information about how they could file a complaint about the therapist with the agency. Just to give them that option, and that would also force the agency to have a complaint process and might get them thinking about consumer protection a little bit more. And after thinking about that, we found that I was kind of trying to look at some example language, and we found that a lot of other health professions actually require that type of notice for their licensees as well. So psychologists, dentists, physicians, they all have to either post or provide written information to consumers about where to file a complaint with their licensing board. So throwing out the idea that we maybe also look at instituting a requirement like that, not only for these exempt settings, but consider it maybe for our licensees as well, to do something similar. So we have some proposed language based on this for you to consider. And I just want to mention that we have a separate agenda item where we're going to look at some other ways to kind of work with some consumer protection issues where we do a little public education that might help consumers in that way as well. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. So we want to, I would say let's stop here and maybe discuss this as a concept.
So this is actually, I was looking at this, it's pretty brilliant, that we can turn it around instead of regulating, the setting, we're creating, that complaint process, to kind of, plug the hole, and so that we can enhance another layer, for consumer protection. So I really like this idea. And then I was also thinking about, one possible thing that, I know there's regulation in place about advertising. Because, the other thing is like, I think the advertising law, means that, it's about, giving the information to the consumer about, what their credentials and also their supervisor. I think that is actually, that would be another way that, to also inform the consumer, when there's something wrong, because this is particularly about the trainees and, the unlicensed or the interns and stuff. And I think that would be really important that, to inform the consumers what really, would be the next level. If this person is in training or not in training, who they can go to, for the next, who the supervisor, for the practice.
Yeah, they're supposed to do that anyway, if
Yes,
they're
they're supposed
licensed
to,
anyway.
yes.
And sort of our thought in the office was, with this particular notice to consumers, was to include it in the informed consent.
Right.
It's just a little paragraph to add, and it's really non-onerous, but the information is there. I mean, some of the boards, like pharmacy, has a poster that is provided to the pharmacies that they post. You'll see the medical board, they'll have a post. Even bar, if you're getting your auto repaired, they have a big poster that says, here's where you can file a complaint, et cetera. So, but I like the step with, perhaps if you have some concerns, you could speak to the supervisor as
absolutely.
well.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if that's more of an internal policy for the employment settings?
So I think, we're talking about the complaint process, and that's definitely, whatever ways, because I like the language that, it's two ways. One way
Right.
you can, an internal mechanism that you can, you can do the complaint, and the other is that you can complain to BBS,
Right.
which is very important,
Right.
that they're not just about the agency, but there is a higher mechanism out there. So, but I think oftentimes also, well, right now it's about the complaint, but at the same time, I think that you can probably add another one, just to make sure that they need to do it, or just to reinforce the idea that, these unlicensed people should be responsible for somebody. Especially, I mean, somebody's responsible to oversight their, to have their oversight. I don't think it would be a problem, for the trainees and for the intern. And yet, for those unlicensed people, I think, it put a step out there to say that, where would be, the quality control. So maybe we're talking about apple to oranges right now, but I'm just thinking that, if, that would be another step, really to talk about, the consumer protection. So, Betty, go ahead.
So I guess I understand the concept of, well, we can make a suggestion, which is all it would be if we did propose some kind of legislation. But I'm just wondering whether there's, the whole concept of, I'd like to hear more rationale for the reasoning behind suggesting that they would file a complaint with the board. Because as near as I can tell, these are unlicensed people that we don't even regulate.
There's two suggestions for language there. I'll let Christy explain.
Yeah, so there's two different, there's one that's focused on our licensees. There's another one focused on the unlicensed and unregistered ones, and what we're telling, would require the agencies is how to file a complaint with their agency, not with us. So the notice would be, are you looking at the language right now?
Yeah.
Okay, let me go turn to that. So if you look at for the MFT 4980.01, so the first part is defining the exempt settings, and then if you look at 2, if you're an individual providing services who is not registered with the board, they have to provide this notice about how to file a complaint about the therapist. And I guess we could add for clarification with the agency or with the,
Yeah, I just don't want the board to end up fielding a bunch of complaints on people that we don't regulate, that we can't do anything about.
Right, and that's a good point. I think maybe we just further clarify that language, that it's for an agency. And then the second piece of that, if you look at 4980.32, that's for licensees. And that's where we talk about informed consent. And when we met with Southern California Counseling Center, they have a mechanism for a complaint. They're one of the entities that typically is an exempt setting, but they have a process to file complaints. What we're at, and they do that because that's just their policy, and I think a number of other entities do that as well. This is just requiring that they do so. Obviously, there's not a lot of teeth because they're not in our setting, but if we have people working in those settings gaining hours, then they're going to have to comply. And my understanding in speaking with those people is they do it anyway because the interns and trainees want to count the hours.
Deb?
On page 7, third bullet down, it says that the private practice would limit 3 BBS registrants. Does that include the interns or associates?
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit. You have to be a registrant to work in a private practice, so yes, that's who we're talking about. Yeah, but we'll talk about this section.
Okay, so it's not going to be broken down into so many associates plus 3?
No,
It's
and this
just
is already.
total 3 no matter what?
And this is already in the law, actually.
Okay,
So,
only
yeah.
3, okay.
But we'll get there.
So let's open to the public. Any comments about attachment A in regards of the complaint process?
Rebecca Gonzalez, National Association of Social Workers, California chapter. I do have a question, wondering if this might create some confusion in a child welfare agency, CPS, because the work that is done in those agencies is more case management and not psychotherapy. People use their clinical skills to talk to people, but it's not psychotherapy. So I wondered if this would create confusion there.
I don't know, didn't your, let's see, individual providing psychotherapy services in any of the above settings? So I would say no.
I guess I don't know if the consumer knows the difference, or I don't know.
Well, and in that case, the notice wouldn't have to be provided. If you're not providing psychotherapy, the notice isn't required.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Jerry Shapiro, School of Social Work, San Francisco State. And looking over to legal counsel because I fear I'm going to complicate things. And it goes back to the question that Rebecca just raised. There are mental health agencies, mental health settings, where either on a fiduciary or a contractual basis, the consumer's understanding that they are specifically contracting for mental health services. Now, for social workers, there's this really interesting and distinctive characterization of psychotherapy. So psychotherapy, and this goes to the Business and Professions Code 4996.9. I'll read this to you. Psychotherapy, within the meaning of this chapter, is the use of psychosocial methods within a professional relationship to assist the person or persons to achieve a better psychosocial adaptation, to acquire greater human realization of psychosocial potential and adaptation, and to modify internal and external conditions which affect individuals, groups, or communities in respect to behavior, emotions, and thinking in respect to their intrapersonal and interpersonal processes. So that rather distinctive characterization of psychotherapy may be different than a consumer wanting to specifically seek mental health services where they're looking specifically, let's say, for cognitive behavioral therapy or for narrative therapy or for a specific treatment that relates to anxiety or depression. So in this definition of psychotherapy that applies to LCSWs, maybe within the provision of Child Protective services, or as counseling in school settings is now evolving so that there's wellness centers, and in medical settings where you have the characterization of practice moving towards what's called integrated behavioral health, you now have the provision of therapeutic services basically embedded into the provision of services specifically in that agency, whether it's oncology in a hospital setting, or whether it's restorative practices in a school, or trauma-informed care in a school setting, or in child protective services, it might specifically be an approach to reunify a family. So going back to my initial nod to legal counsel, if you're going to an agency where, as part of the informed consent, there is the establishment of either a contractual basis where what you're contracting for is explicitly psychotherapy, and or there's a fee arrangement that suggests some kind of fiduciary component, that's really different than the therapeutic discourse in a wellness center or in a behavioral health orientation, and in child protective services, trauma-informed advocacy. So how to maintain the integrity of what your intent is, which is admirable, without complicating or putting at risk social workers trying to maintain the integrity of looking at the totality of the client that might involve therapeutic intervention without having the specific contractual agreement about, okay, now we're entering a formal structured therapy zone. So I just wanted to raise this with the board, and I apologize I haven't been here during the year because things get crazy during the academic year, but I'm really happy to be a part of this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Shapiro, I have a question for you. So, does CPS require that they hold, if they're working in that agency, are the individuals required to be licensed or registered with the board? Is that a requirement?
It's not a requirement, but what happens in many court cases where there's a contested hearing
Sure.
is that the question will come up in terms of what standing does the CPS worker have in terms of being able to provide the court with an informed perspective on what constitutes the best interests of the child. So increasingly, there is a need for bringing in awareness of therapeutic modality and specifically right now in CPS, trauma-informed care. How to be able to really unify the ways, the pieces of the foster care setting, the attachment experience of the child initially, what seems to be playing out in terms of any health conditions, and the role of the child protective service worker in unifying that vision and informing the court.
Right. Because if they're not licensed, I get a complaint, there's really not a lot I can do.
I understand. I'm not so much advocating for one position or the other, but
Right.
trying to add to the conversation, and that's why I apologize for complicating things. But
Yeah, so in
This-
that situation, we would not require them to put that information out there, because if the consumer had a complaint, they should work through CPS and that mechanism, not us.
I think, let me add to it. So I think, the bigger picture of the discussion really is about, whether the services provided by these social workers, in the CPS setting, whether they constitute psychotherapy. And I think that is a bigger, discussion, probably not quite pertain to right now, but it is in the mix because it's very important that if, let's say, their services, constitute psychotherapy, then, how do this, particular regulation would affect them? And yet, if they are not, that's what Kim was saying that, then maybe, that's, may not apply. So, so my thinking is that, we can actually, we should probably just focus on, the complaint process. And even for, the good thing about the child welfare, the CPS service, it is in an exempt setting. Because they are governments. So when we're talking about the complaint process, they do have that in place. And then whether it's, they rise to the level of having the informed consent like the mental health services provider. Now, that is a different discussion because that's more internal. And so I think, a big part of this, I think we'll talk down the road, is about the education, for the public. What really is psychotherapy? What really is the services they will be getting. And then their perception we cannot control, but we can educate them, what really mental health service is about and what to expect from their provider. Yeah.
That's really, thank you. That's really helpful. It triggers something in terms of, maybe this takes us into unintended consequences. Because I think currently now, CPS workers who are registered with the board can receive supervision towards their hours to become licensed in the state of California. So I hope there wouldn't be an unintended consequence of perhaps the distinction that's being made in some way preventing CPS workers from being able to use, I just wanted to make sure, Kim.
Right. No,
Okay.
thanks for the reminder. I think that is, the unintended consequence we want to avoid. So I'm sure that, staff will keep that in mind.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Any other discussion from the public? Oh,
And one more
Christy,
thing.
yes.
Thank you, Roseanne, for bringing this up and reminding me about it. I did not include LEPs in this language as far as the licensee notice. So I wanted to see what you all thought about that.
Call her out.
I'm just trying to think this through because it would be my understanding that if an LEP is practicing in a private setting, they would be doing that anyway because they're under the board regulations and guidelines. If an LEP is practicing in a school setting, that's a whole different ball of wax in that they have a very different structure. They're still bound by our licensing limitations and regulations and guidelines and everything else. But they would be under contract probably to the school itself and would be, I would think any complaint process would, I'd have a hard time thinking about whether the complaint would be with the board or with, it would seem to me that it would be with the actual, like a due process or a complaint with one of the regulatory agencies for the school.
Yeah, I think it would fall under the school setting, actually. And generally, from what I understand, that's sort of their first hierarchy anyway,
Yeah.
unless they're in private practice.
That's why I was having a hard time seeing
Yeah.
if they're under that umbrella already. I don't think it would be prudent to have a secondary with a filing with the board. I
No,
think
but
that
to
just
have the
gonna-
license, but have an LEP licensee provide that notice, that would be appropriate if they're in a private practice?
If they're in a private practice, absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Absolutely,
wondering.
and I would expect that they would do that anyway.
I would hope so.
I would hope so. I mean, I mean, otherwise, they're probably violating all kinds of board regulations.
So I
So,
wonder if there's a way to structure the law so that we can include LEPs, but only if they are practicing independently and not under contract with a school district.
Well, then, to me, it kind of begs the question, because we do have other licensees working in schools.
School
and
districts.
So,
So are we exempting them?
yeah, or do we want to just focus on private practice? I mean, because the school is an exempt setting. We have licensees working in all of these types of settings, so, I mean, they still are our licensees, and if a consumer wants to file a complaint, I mean, we still are the place to do that, and of course with the school too.
I have an example, actually, and I'm just, thanks for bringing this up, because I am thinking that even in my circle of friends, I can see that, an LAP, go into private practice, and provide kind of like, the similar services of psychotherapy. And so yeah, because I'm thinking that, at least, not to name names, but, it happens. So I think, it's, if it's applying to three professionals, maybe we should really include that, just to, since we're doing this, and this is not putting, much restriction, it's really about consumer protection. So I'm more leaning towards, it may not apply to everybody, but at the same time, I think it would be helpful to be there, to have that, in the LP law.
the only caution I would have about that is that the LEP license structure does not include psychotherapy per se. That is not a component of our practice. And we do provide, I guess you could call it loosely defined therapeutic service in as much as it affects a student's behavioral skills or dynamics in the family that may apply to a school outcome or learning outcome, but it's not psychotherapy.
Yeah,
And so I wouldn't want it to exceed, I wouldn't want the governance structure to exceed the actual licensing
Yeah.
limitations.
Right. And you don't want to bring it up as like, okay, if you provide psychotherapy, and it's okay that you provide psychotherapy because there's a law,
Yeah, it's kind of like, wait a minute, this says that, it just seems like that could be really confusing, yeah.
I went back and looked at the scope of practice, and it does use the term providing psychological counseling, but of course it has to be related to academics and education, the education system. So
So the way that we have the notices structured for, licensee and a non-licensee, so if the way that reads, if we read it for LEPs, maybe we would just put, if we're looking at page 11, the one for non-licensees, and there's that, it starts with the, and then in paren, office, unit, individual name. Maybe you could say, you'd wordsmith it, so maybe we could say the Sacramento County School District receives in response to maybe complaints regarding the practice of services received from a licensed educational psychologist. Here's how you file a complaint. Does that would, because that's where the complaint would go, right, Betty? It would go to the school district, correct?
Not necessarily,
Okay.
unfortunately. It could also go to a number of outside, like Office of Civil Rights. It could go through the Office of Administrative Hearings. I mean, it could go to different entities that regulate educational laws and.
Okay, so scratch that. What if we just had it applicable to just licensees, LEPs?
So what would it, what would it?
Well, it would be like what it's, the notice to consumers, Board of Behavioral Sciences receives and responds to complaints regarding the practice. Maybe we just say of its licensees.
But yeah, so for the unlicensed, I think it's good to use the word psychotherapy, but for our licensees, yeah,
Yeah.
it should be more broad. That's a good point. Or services provided.
Or services provided, yeah. I think the intent of the notice is to simply, here's a mechanism if you're feeling stuck or you don't know where to go. Here's a regulatory agency that will respond to that.
If they're our licensee, we are that board,
Right.
whether they also file a complaint with the school, you know,
They're not precluded, yeah, they're not prohibited from doing it.
right?
Maybe we just, for LEPs, just kind of a general blanket statement.
Maybe for all the
of them.
professions, I feel like.
I just didn't want to convolute it with the psychotherapy part.
Right.
Yeah, that makes good sense.
So maybe we just don't call it psychotherapy. During the practice of its license, practice as being a broad term, and then we can use scope of practice, and then that still allows us to, consider the setting and the services that are provided.
I actually like that, including that language of scope of practice. I think that makes sense, because that helps
Narrow it.
Yeah.
differentiate it.
Right.
Okay.
So we changing the language to?
I think so. We might be regarding the scope of practice of its licensees.
Right, okay.
So something like response to complaints regarding services provided by the licensee within the scope of practice defined in section wherever, or as defined in.
I don't know if we need to define it. Do we need to put scope of practice as defined, Sabina, or can we just say,
Leave it without the reference.
yeah, can we just say
Okay.
scope of practice? Okay. I hear a head nod. Right. Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, because when you put the law number in there, the section number, if it gets changed, we have to go back and, yeah. Okay. All right.
I'm going to say something finally. No,
Yes.
this one really, this is like just small, tiny little thing. Can we do something about not putting the email address up there because those change so frequently and stuff? I'm kind of
Sure.
putting that, just maybe
Yeah.
just say go to the website.
Website, yeah.
The number should stay pretty constant, so.
So, okay.
No, I like that. I think that's good.
How about the phone number?
Probably should do the.
So that phone number is?
Phone number's not changing when we move.
Yeah, and that should stay, the phone number will stay constant more than
Yeah.
we could have changes in the email address.
So make sure that you don't designate that number to a
License notice I
staff.
was going to change.
Wait, you know what? I wonder
That
if
to
we
you.
just say, because the web address will never change.
Correct. I mean,
So maybe we-
just putting the web address, contact information on the web address or something to that matter.
Yeah,
I mean,
What about the physical address?
no.
No,
because nobody uses
no need, huh?
snail mail, yeah.
Right, okay.
Oh, I already have that contact.
Right.
in the board.
So, any other discussion? Minor changes? No, okay.
Great.
So,
Okay.
very good. So
Go back to
Christie, we
page-
can continue.
Go back to page
to-
6.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about the for-profits, which there was a big learning curve for me on this, because we have so many for-profit business entity types that can be set up for the purposes of providing professional mental health services. So this does get a little bit dense, and bear with me here. I'm going to try to work through this, but this is going to be our more difficult piece, I think. And so we'll start off with talking about private practices and professional corporations and the difference and how they're the same, and the different laws that currently apply to those in case we do want to look at changing definitions. We just really have to be conscious of what it might affect. So as we have talked about before, only the LCSW statute has a private practice definition, and that definition means a setting that's owned by one of our licensees, or it also includes psychologist or a physician, or a professional corporation of any of these licensed professions. So right now, that LCSW statute incorporates professional corporations into that definition. Be a professional corporation, you have to register with the Secretary of State and meet the requirements of the Corporations Code. And there are a couple of legal definitions of a professional corporation. And take a look at that. Attachment B. So there's one in the Corporations Code as well as in the Business and Professions Code. And basically, it's a corporation that's filed with the Secretary of State that's engaged in rendering professional services in a single profession. And when they say a single profession, it doesn't mean you have to have only one type of licensee there. I think it uses that term kind of broadly, so mental health or health services. And then the Business and Professions Code further specifies that the shareholders, officers, directors, and employees who are licensees have to be in compliance with the Corporation Act. So, but that also specifies who can be shareholders and officers. And so you can't be a non-licensee and be an owner of a professional corporation. So that's, to me, the biggest distinguishing thing. You can be a health professional. You could be a different types of health professionals that own a professional corporation, but you can't be unlicensed or. So our current law, it does sometimes lump professional corporations and private practices together, but sometimes it talks about them separately, and that may be fine. That might not be an issue. But we just have to be really careful in how we craft our definitions in light of that. So, and once I think we kind of settle on something, I can go back and take a look at all those laws and see what might need some little tweaking. So the most important ones I felt like, or that I wanted to bring to your attention is, are these few bullets here. So these are current law. So professional corporations have to follow all laws regarding registrant employment and supervised experience in a private practice setting. So there are a lot of times we mention in a private practice setting you can't do this, or you have to do this a specific way. So this professional corporations are also subject to that. All those private practice restrictions regarding registrants and supervised experience. And then an MFT trainee cannot work in a private practice or a professional corporation. The private practice cannot employ more than 3 BBS registrants, and then a professional corporation cannot have more than 3 for each employee or shareholder who is a qualified supervisor. And there right now there's a limit of 15, but our AB 93 would remove that limit, so it would be 3 per supervisor, period. So that's how that one is looking like it's going to wind up. So. And then there's a separate law that requires anybody supervising experience hours in a professional corporation to be employed full-time by the corporation and actively engaged in performing professional services at and for the corporation. And that does not apply to a private practice setting. And I'm thinking maybe it's because it's assumed that private practice is typically one person. So, of course, you're going to be that employed, and actively engaged in performing services because you're the one. But from what I understand now, that may not always, that's not always the case. You can have a private practice that's more than one licensee who is the owner of it, and you're not a professional corporation. You might be a partnership. So that's where this one law doesn't quite fit. We might want to take a look at that. But then the other side of that is you can also have one licensee incorporate. So you could be just one licensed MFT, and I'm going to form a professional corporation and file with the Secretary of State. So yeah. So there are different forms of this. So you can have. It's in some ways it's a technicality that you've filed to be a professional corporation. So again, you could be a partnership as well and not do that filing. So that's the issue with private practices and professional corporations. But I want to go on to talk about the other types of for-profit settings where mental health services can be provided and what those look like, because those definitions are maybe going to overlap or be interrelated, or maybe we want to include them in a private practice definition somehow. So there are some things that we really need to carefully weigh here. So if we do include for-profit businesses in the private practice definition, it could impact whether schools could be allowed to continue placing students gaining practicum experience in for-profit entities. Right now we have 42% of programs placing students in for-profits that are not considered a private practice, because no student can work in a private practice right now. They can be placed in a for-profit. So, and also considering if we did decide to include them in the private practice definition, we have 30% of schools that don't have enough placements for their students, so it would worsen that problem. But that doesn't mean we couldn't include them and then carve out an exception for students. So that may be workable if we want to go that route. The other thing is if we included for-profit entities in the other types of for-profits in the private practice definition, it would subject other types of companies to all the laws pertaining to private practices, which we've included in attachment D. Which as looking at it, I'm not sure it would be problematic, but we could go back and look at each of those and more carefully if we did decide to do that and see, again, how it might play out and what we might want to tweak a little bit. So I want to talk a little bit more about what I learned about for-profit businesses in the mental health world. And so you can have a company that's owned by an individual who is not a licensee. You can have a partnership, multiple owners, and you could be licensees or non-licensees. Or you can be a general stock corporation. And I have a couple of examples because Telecare is an employee-owned general stock corporation, and it's one that we've gotten questions about because it's big. And with practicum coordinators saying, hey, is this okay for me to place students here? And yeah, the law does not exclude those. So. And then HealthNet of California, which owns MHN, which is an employee assistance program, is also a general stock corporation. So again, an employee assistance program could be a for-profit. You also have mental health clinics that are for-profits. Substance abuse recovery programs are very commonly a for-profit. They could be owned by one person. And then, of course, your medical settings, hospitals, nursing homes, dialysis clinics. And so a lot of these for-profits are regulated by the state through Department of Public Health or Department of Health Care Services, not necessarily the general stock corporations. Telecare, I wouldn't say that they are necessarily regulated like a substance abuse clinic or medical settings. We have not, it's not something that's been brought to our attention saying that there's problems with students working in these types of settings, that students are being, exploited, or it's not a safe type of thing, or that they're not getting good experience. So we don't, it's, the one thing that was mentioned in the survey is that the substance abuse programs are sometimes, they're not, maybe not ideal because they can be limited in scope. But as I thought about that, it's also, in the world we're in now, it is it's probably a good experience for them to have some exposure to that, but it's maybe not as broad. But then we have 2 years of supervised experience overall and clinical hours required. So I'm not sure how much of a problem that is. And it is, up to the schools to kind of evaluate each setting in of itself, because some of those programs do provide mental health psychotherapy, along with the substance abuse services. So. And then I want to talk a little bit about where there might be other concerns about for-profits. I was doing some reading, and mostly what you find when you hear about concerns about for-profits in the healthcare world are medical settings. And so the American Public Health Association, I'm going to read this to you, but I think they're more focused on a medical setting. I'm not sure this is as big of a problem in the mental health world, but maybe it is. Correct me if I'm wrong. So their concern is that the primary fiduciary responsibility of for-profit health corporations is to their shareholders, not to the health of their patients. For the for-profit entities and caregivers who share in the profits or whose patient care decisions can be influenced by financial incentives, there's a clear potential for conflict of interest. But, not all nonprofits, and this is from me, not from them, the next paragraph, it's not all the nonprofits do pay dividends. They might reinvest the money back into the company and, into the services provided. And I think the profit potential in mental health is not as high as for medical treatment. You don't have the prescriptions and the, the newfangled, the equipment and, things that might be less of a concern in this field. The other thing is that any for-profit that's providing mental health services, they have liability insurance, which, I'm sure there are requirements of your insurance policy that you provide a certain, level of quality service. So I think there are some things that outweigh those types of concerns, but I wanted to bring that to your attention as something to weigh as we're doing this. So I did draft some definitions in attachment E. You also might want to refer to attachment C, because we presented this before. We have some example private practice definitions. And Roseanne and I were talking in the office a little bit, and she, maybe we want to look at some of those examples a little closer. We did take a stab here at this, but we might want to we might want to revise it a little bit. It was the Ohio one. Yeah. The ASWB, right? So let's look at the, where should we start with this? Let's look at the draft definitions, and then I'll point you back to these couple. Where I started out with was defining private practice and other for-profits separately. Doesn't mean that's where we have to go. I just figured let's start here and see how this looks and works. So a private practice is a business which provides clinical mental health services and meets both of the following. It's owned and operated by one or more licensed mental health professionals or other licensed individuals who can provide clinical services, mental health services, and their licensed professionals have responsibility for the practice and services provided and set conditions of client payment or reimbursement for the provision of services. And that's the piece that you liked from the other states, is maybe tweaking that piece of it a little bit. I'm going to turn you back to the attachment C on the example definitions. The piece that Roseanne liked under the Ohio definition is they sets up their own condition of exchange with the clients. Is that right? Yeah. We might want to tweak that a little bit. Sets up their own conditions of exchange with the clients. And then the ASWB is another possible option, where the licensee assumes responsibility and accountability for the nature and quality of the services in exchange for direct payment or third-party reimbursement. At the end, okay, the direct payment.
Third-party reimbursement.
Right.
Okay, so in exchange for direct payment or third-party reimbursement.
And that's what I also, find, I like that language a little bit, the accountability, and also the third-party reimbursement. Yeah, I think it's a little clarification and put a little bit more description about not just responsibility, but also accountable, for the services. And Betty, go ahead.
Getting more and more complicated with LEPs.
Oh, yeah.
I'm assuming this would include LEPs, right?
Private practice definition, sure.
Because most LEPs,
That's where they practice.
that's where they practice.
Right.
Although we could define it differently in LEP law. It is a much simpler law, and it doesn't have, I mean, you do still have some sections that address private practice, but it doesn't necessarily have to be exactly the same.
So I'm fine if we want to carve out LEPs because they really are a separate kind of
Yeah, we can do
entity. It's just, if we leave it like this without carving it out, then we'd have to fool around with the language in this to make sure that it encompasses LEP private practice.
Okay. So I think then we can come back at the next meeting with some draft language that's specific to LEP only.
And it just, and as Christie said, if we can have that just be separate, that's fine with me. I just
we
don't
can.
want them to misunderstand that this would apply.
Right, because we have, within our lovely law book, we have 4 practice acts. And we, where we align, we try to align, but, we can put the definition in each section, each practice act, and modify it for that particular license type.
And that's what we.
And I think that's what we
all
would,
that- the
yeah,
other-
that's what we do. I mean, if we kind of go with the generic language, mostly it would work, there's a lot of similarities in the practice in definitions between LPCCs and LMFTs. We modify it a little bit for social workers sometimes. There's no reason we can't do it for LEPs.
I just didn't want it to, when it says for-profit settings and we're defining that, I just wanted to make sure that it didn't spill over, because then we have to
Right.
really.
Okay.
I also, also like the Ohio, the language about, talking about, an individual practice independently, in partnership, or in cooperation practice. I think, that's kind of, just, include, just different level of a possible combination about what private practice can be. But I don't know if it if kind of like contradict with our existing corporation law.
Well, if we're saying the business is owned and operated by one or more licensed mental health professionals or other licensees, health professionals who can provide clinical services, I feel like that includes a sole
independent,
practitioner, a
right.
partnership, or a professional corporation, which are the 3 types
Right.
of, I mean, we could get more specific. I'm trying to think. I would have to think, I think I would have to think about that a little bit more.
Well,
How we would word that. Because I don't think it could hurt to be a little more specific.
right. I think the private practice, the whole idea is to practice independently. And so I think, the word independent is actually really good, so that, they know that, define that it's not, you're not attached to, a certain organization. You are doing it independently. Yeah, and that would, also include those independent contractor, so they are in private practice, but at the same time, they just have a contractor with the other people. So I think, just, I like it a little, sometimes, just a little bit more language, in there, so that, yes, it's broad, but also, can put some parameters in there. Go ahead. Oh, sorry.
And maybe I'm way off base here. When you were listing all of the different things, would you include like an LLC in that as well?
I believe that you cannot, yes, you cannot form an LLC as a licensee. It's
But I could if I was a non-licensee and then hire licensees.
Yes, so if you're a non-licensee, you're going to actually not fit this private practice definition, you're going to fit this other for-profit definition. So the private practice definition, it has to be solely, and maybe we should add that word, the business is solely owned and operated by licensed mental health professionals. You know, that might help clarify it.
Get around that real fast.
Yeah, yeah.
Any other comments, maybe from the public?
Good morning, everybody. Does that sound okay?
No, you're
This is Mike Griffin from Camp. Nice to see all of you. These are such tough definitions. I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, oh, that's right. No, I like that one better. No, I like that one. I mean, these is very difficult. If I understood the effort, and I appreciated it, you were attempting to tease out for-profit settings, which would be appropriate and acceptable, but which wouldn't be categorized, fall into that category of private practice and then start excluding people as a result of it. It's difficult to do that, but I like Ohio's definition because it talks about, and I like the words owned and operated by, but I think, and this is probably just saying the obvious, the intent is try to not create a definition which captures acceptable for-profit settings and then excludes all the trainees who want to be in them. So I probably didn't add very much to your discussion by saying that, but I like Ohio's definition probably the best as a good example to work from.
Thank you. Any other comments?
G.E. Ayers with the California Association for Licensed Professional Clinical Counselors. Thank you. Just wanted to give our input that we, as far as definitions, we thought that the definition of the Association of Social Work Boards model law looks about as good as any. So, thank you.
Any other comments? All right. So, do we have enough input that maybe we can craft, some language? Roseanne,
I think that we could make some, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Make some tweaks to the definitions, but I think it also kind of involves looking at some places that once we have those definitions, looking at some other pieces of our law and looking at the actual law and seeing how that plays into it, because that could raise some issues that we haven't thought about. There's a lot of references to private practice and corporations and exempt settings in the law are places where we set rules for one type of individuals where it might cause us, if we have a private practice definition and now an other setting definition, where it causes us to kind of scratch our heads and think, oh, well, what about in this situation? Do we want to allow, trainees to work in that setting, or do we want to allow certain limits in that setting?
So I guess what we'll do is we'll kind of tweak some language, wordsmith it, and then take a look at the laws that it might impact, and then bring it back at the next meeting. Chris, yes.
We also have the added complication that AB 93 affects a lot of those sections, and that's in the process of a huge change right now. But the good news is we should know pretty soon if that will be moving forward and what exactly it will look like. But that is a lot of the law that's going to be affected by this is in the process of going through that change.
So what if we just, because I'm thinking the next meeting we could have would be in September, because the board meeting's not shaping up to be a 3-day full meeting.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so do like what we did previously and use one of those days for the committee meetings. By then, we should know where AB 93 is, and so have a better idea of the impact.
So if this goes to, because the next step is the exempt setting committee and then to the policy and advocacy committee meeting. And so, so it probably will have to wait until, well, we can actually bring it back to a full board too, that
Well,
if-
right, because what we would, if we looked at it,
I'm just more thinking
If we
about
had
the
a-
legislative cycle.
right, so if we did the committee, if we did another committee meeting in September, we would have some time, and then there would be another P&A committee in October.
Oh, is it in October?
Yes.
Okay.
And then we have the November board
so
meeting.
we're flagged well.
And we're flagged well for that. Yeah, so, I mean, the timing would work out really well.
I was secretly hoping that this is our last meeting.
Well, you
But
know.
it's okay.
It could be.
It's okay.
It could be, yeah, I mean, I think,
No,
I
it's
could
fine.
see,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, with this particular piece, but if it's the committee's desire to just move it forward to the P&A, we could bring it to August P&A. But I'm thinking, we're not going to have enough info on 93 at that point.
I don't think we can bring it to.
I don't think we're quite ready in terms of the full language for this.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
But I will say that if we don't, if it doesn't make it to the November board meeting, or it doesn't make it completely through the board meeting, if there are still concerns, what we can do is take some of the language, this may be, because this will be a pretty big change, we could still introduce a bill with some partial language in that and plan on amending it, because the board would meet again in February or March. And so there's, usually about the end of March is when bills can be amended, but anyway, so we would probably, that buys us some time. We'll know about 93 by, bill deadline is end of October, but we should have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen with 93 by mid-September.
Just in time for the
If
board
not
meeting.
sooner.
Yeah, my guess is sooner.
Right.
My hope is sooner.
So we might be able to catch, to the, even the P&A meeting, if, we really want to jumpstart it. I think, I'm just more thinking about, we don't want to, have the bill sit here for another year, because
No,
we
it
miss
won't.
that. Right.
No, we won't miss that deadline.
I don't
No, no,
think, unless there are serious concerns that come up, I don't think that we would have a problem getting full language by March.
No, not at all.
And this is going to go through the legislation, have a, in form of a bill instead of
Right.
this.
This is in law,
the
so it has to
rulemaking
go
one.
Yeah, the rulemaking is,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we can, have the staff work with, Roseanne and Christy work with the legal counsel a little bit more, draft the language, and then come back next time. Okay. All right. So we do not need any more action. So now, one last call. Any other public comments? Just to bring everything back together. Okay, good. Thank you.
I just really
Yes.
quickly, so you like the concept of defining private practice and other
Yes.
for-profits separately?
Yes.
Okay, so that works for you
That's
guys.
my
Okay.
preference. I need to defer back to my board members. You guys are okay with that?
And then the Ohio and
And the
ASWB language.
Yes, right, okay. Okay, so, I think you're pretty much done with this,
Yeah, I think
this
yeah,
suggestion.
that's-
So shall we take a break? So the time now is 9:46, and let's come back in about 10 minutes. Thank you. Normally it will mean say 15, so. In session. The time is 10:02. So before we start, I want to continue on my little conversation with Christy, just to thank her, for conceptualizing, the languages, and to bring in the information from all these different pieces, have sufficient information for us to, to talk about the definition. And it's such a big, concept. And so, so I just want to sincerely thank you, for just wonderful work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well,
Yes.
and it helps to have the excellent people that I work with, and, Kim and Roseanne and I all worked on a lot of this, and then actually had David Jensen from Exempt help me out, as well as learning about some of the ins and outs of the corporations and LLCs and all that. So, we have some good help, but thank you.
No, thank you. This is really absolutely helpful. So let's move on to the next topic, and that's the outreach efforts to educate consumers about therapy settings and consumer rights.
Yes, so we had talked at the last meeting about some other things we could do in terms of exempt settings, as far as protecting consumers who might be seeing an unlicensed therapist. And So we, one of our thoughts was, can we better inform consumers about the important qualities to look for when you're seeking mental health services, really in any setting? And we might include things like precautions for consumers, or somehow explaining the characteristics of a competent therapist or therapy setting. It might get a little difficult, but there's a way to do it. And there's, I was looking around online at what others maybe do, and I think it could be done. I started with our current consumer information section of the website, which I've started actually even before this committee went that way. I had started taking a look at it, and we have some revisions too. We have a brochure called Self-Empowerment, Choosing a Mental Health Professional in California, and we had already drafted some revisions to that. And so as part of that, I took a look at the rest of our consumer section, and so there's a couple things that are in the process of being updated right now, which is the aging and mental health section. The professional therapy never includes sex booklet is undergoing revision, and that's actually a legislative process because of the way that was done. And then the self-empowerment brochure. The other, and so what I can do is, those haven't been finalized yet, so we can look at those again and see what else we might want to do. But I want to kind of go over everything that's in our consumer information section and see where we might want to expand, because it's looking at some of the other boards, they do a little bit more than what we do, so I think there's room for us to work on that. And so right now we have in the consumer section is about the board's licensees. What is an LCSW, LMFT? How to file a complaint. We have a section on how to find care. We have a lot of links that need to, that I'm working on updating those right now, actually, but it does have that. We talk about HIPAA and telehealth. So what I just wanted to, I didn't look at it and say, oh, here's where I think we want to go. I would like to hear from you all, I think, first, to kind of focus us in on, is there website content? Are there actual brochures that people can print and hand out? What do we want to look at, and what are the possible topics? And we can go from there.
Yeah, these are pretty comprehensive, and I think that the educating, when I was reading that the self-empowerment brochure, it's actually really good. That explaining about different topics, including what therapy is about, how to ask questions, how to define help. So I think this is great. And I'm also thinking about now, are we talking about, just refining, the information, but not, looking like the professional therapy never includes sex, and maybe, to make some of those information mandatory, right? We're not looking at that route. No. Okay. We're just looking at, if the information now is sufficient to cover, the consumer protection.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and I think too, on the licensee part, there's a lot of improvements we can make, but we really need to wait till 93 goes through, because then that's sort of the last of everything. And then from that, I can see that we can have, update our supervision information, supervisor information. We've always aspired to have tutorials on the licensure process for the applicants. A lot of it's been put on the back burner, so to speak, primarily first and foremost because at the times we didn't have staff. And now we're coming to the end of the whole revising of our licensure laws and such. And so I think we're coming up upon a time where the timing could be right for us to do that.
Right.
And so I see this as sort of a natural progression on a lot of it. I think some of that stuff's out there, and I think we just need to update it. But are there any other topics you want out there?
Actually, I think topic-wise, it's pretty comprehensive. But what I'm thinking that, it would be great is to have a video, to encompass everything. Just like a 3-4 minutes of explanation, and you can put it on YouTube.
Okay.
And consumer can access it.
A consumer video, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
I like that.
Okay, I do too. Hello, Caesar.
Yeah.
Board members, any other comments in terms of the outreach efforts, the information? Okay. Public?
Mike Griffin from Camp. First of all, thank you for putting all this effort and time into developing all these materials. It's great. Is this appropriate now to give feedback on the consumer booklet that's there? Is that okay? You're wanting that? I have just a few comments on it.
Yeah.
I like it. I like the content of it, as you said, but just a few constructive inputs. Questions to ask your therapist. You may want to interview several therapists. I'm not sure that we want to say to people, you may want to interview several therapists. Sometimes I think that's not that helpful when people interview multiple. I would be more comfortable with more than one there. This is nitpicking, I know, but it's just a suggestion. And then on continued questions, under assessment process, it says the process usually consists of 1 to 3 sessions. I think I'd be more comfortable with 1 or more. I mean, because it varies. It's not, when we say something like 3, it sounds a little bit arbitrary. And again, I feel like I'm nitpicking. The treatment plan, at the end of the assessment process, your therapist should give you a working diagnosis. Not everybody is applicable to that. I think we'd want to be more general. I get the point. I mean, your therapist should be able to give you feedback and talk with you about your treatment plan, including the anticipated or recommended length of treatment and possible referrals. So I would just suggest broader language that way that gives, rather than saying the specific number of sessions anticipated. I think that's tough to do. So I just wanted to give that general input, and I appreciate the effort into the booklet.
Mike, I might be in touch with you on the treatment plan section and just to kind of run it by you, because I didn't quite get everything you were saying, but let's, maybe I can email you and we can work on it.
I would be absolutely happy
Okay.
to do that, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I'm just making it a little bit more general about, I mean, I like that, and in workshops, I tell people, you should be talking about your treatment plan and
Right.
giving your thoughts about the anticipated length of treatment and having a discussion about it, but I like it when it's broad language rather than locking people in, this is how many visits I think you need. Because and then, I mean, I know you know this, trainees and young therapists get very literal about, I have to do it exactly this way, and we're wanting them to get the concept rather than get too specific. I'd be happy to give input. Yeah.
This is great. And, as a layperson, that's stuff that I would have no idea. So I appreciate that.
I would
very
love
much.
to. That'd
Yeah.
be my pleasure.
Okay.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you.
Hi, JV.
TV airs with CalPIC. Just one of the things on the guide, I would suggest you consider adding LPCCs.
Yes,
to the list
absolutely.
of it.
Yes, they're being added. This is very outdated, we
No,
realize.
I understand, but I just had to say that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
So the other possible, thing is about, to list, some of the treatment modality, probably, individual counseling, group counseling, that kind of just overview, or some, put into specific interventions. It may include case management, that kind of stuff. So, just to kind of close up that little gap, after your treatment plan, then what do you do? So, you can, your form of, mental health services might include, that kind of stuff. Just, a little education about, possibly in each section, apart from talking therapy, now you have like the EMDR or the children, they might have different, the more the age appropriate, type of therapy.
So what if we threw something in there that's generic, like gives you feedback about your treatment plan, therapeutic goals, and then and different approaches that may be used to achieve those goals.
To achieve your goals, yeah.
Mhm. Something that, because if you say modalities, the consumer's going to go, huh?
Right.
Yeah, they're not, but if we
And we're not
give it a different.
promoting,
No, because I would want to stay away from a specified
Absolutely.
modality, because if they're being treated in a new therapeutic
Right.
modality, they're going to flip.
I
And
just want to have something general,
General.
to let them know that, this is the outcome, or this is going to be the process, or
Right.
there's some intervention to help you accomplish your goal.
Right.
Yeah.
You could say something along the lines of, the therapeutic goals and the, not methods, but something like that, methods to achieve those goals, or.
Yeah, or that your therapist may decide with you, the appropriate intervention to help you accomplish your goal, through, something like that.
Okay.
Otherwise it will be look like, okay, we assess, we treat, we have a treatment plan done. Okay, all right.
good.
All right, any other feedback? Good. So Christy, do you have enough to move forward, with some feedback about the brochure, the possible video, no legislative mandate?
Yep. Keep it simple.
I know, it's like, no, don't go there. Okay, so we really don't need to have a motion for this topic. Okay, great, awesome. Okay, so looks like we can move on if there's no more discussion. Okay, so the last topic, it's about the outreach effort to educate students about practicum placement settings.
So we kind of came to the conclusion that we'd like to help students be a little better informed about some issues that might come up pertaining to practicum settings. So I kind of wanted to go over what we currently do, what we've done in the past, and maybe where we want to go. So what we do right now in terms of outreach is we attend in person or by telephone the MFT consortium meetings, which often includes LPCC as well. There's 8 regional consortia groups that meet regularly, and what these consortium meetings do is they look at the different protocols that schools use in preparing their students for practicum training, and then they collaborate with the sites that provide the clinical experience and supervision. And so we have agency representatives and educators at these meetings, so we, that's something we'll continue to do. It's been very helpful, I think, on both ends. Going back to, we used to do, we had actually worked to expand our outreach back in 2008, specifically to the schools. I mean, our whole outreach program, we kind of had a kickoff of something kind of bigger, but we really wanted to focus on the students because that's where it starts, get them ready, where they're fresh and thinking about it the whole time, where they're heading with licensure. And so we had a staff person designated to outreach, and we did a lot of traveling and making presentations about the licensing process. But then the next year we had furloughs and the travel freeze because of the the budget issues, and that was one of the areas that we had to really limit because you couldn't travel anymore without a very serious reason for traveling. And with the furloughs we had to take another look at everything we were doing. So because that was a newer program and it wasn't a core service, that was cut back. But when we were undertaking that initiative, we had published some student handbooks that provide information about degree programs, registration with the board, experience, and exam requirements. We did not, we removed I think they were actually fairly well used, but because of everything that happened, we never updated the booklets and they just kind of fell by the wayside. I think because of the furloughs and we were playing catch up for so long, it's not something we took a look back at, but I think that maybe this is the time to do that again. So I think they're helpful, and if we are looking at, the current booklets didn't address this, but we can incorporate information about what to look for when selecting a practicum site. So it might be things like, what is effective supervision? What are what constitutes a good training or a learning kind of a environment or opportunities, and you need an exposure to a diverse spectrum of clients and experiences, things like that, to help students kind of pick some students don't have much choice, unfortunately, but for the ones that do, we can give them some guidance, or at least if you're a student who doesn't have a lot of choice, and you realize, this doesn't seem right. Maybe there's some way that you can talk to your school and they can talk to the agency and work to make it better. So I think that would be helpful. So that's really all I have on that one, and any thoughts would be welcome.
Board members, any feedback? Betty and Deb.
So this is a Kim question. Do we have the resources in today's climate to put any more energy or resources into this kind of an updated, perhaps, version of that document?
For sure. Yeah. I think it's possible. We can do that. Again, I think it all kind of hinges on waiting for 93 to finish and become solid. Some of the other things that we have talked about with the licensing managers, that everyone is so receptive to us coming out and talking to the students. And how can we maximize those opportunities? And so we have floated a couple of ideas around doing something northern, doing something southern, maybe a school hosts, but inviting the neighboring schools to come on in and listen. Again, that's where the video tutorials come in. There's all kinds of ways to reach people, especially the students, because they're the ones that go online. They're the ones that watch the podcasts. They're the ones that watch the TED Talks. So I think if we start making the message accessible that way, we're going to reach more students. So it's all stuff we've been kicking around. And I think we're just we're right at the cusp where that could come to fruition.
And when I said brochure, I mean, the days of pencil, paper brochures are dinosaurs. But
Right.
I was thinking of an online kind of brochure type thing that students could access, because I do see some value in clarifying some of these really sticky points about what you can do as a trainee versus what you can do as a registrant. I mean, it's really complicated.
It is, and I like, when Steve and Mark and Charles were looking at the website and redesigning the website and looking at what some of the other DCA entities have done, we designed our website with that in mind in the future. So if you went to the applicant page, you select the license type you want to apply for, you'll hit that, there'll be the link to all the forms, and then the tutorial. And so that's kind of where our vision is on that. And we work with public affairs to get that published, and so we'll do our best. And if not, then maybe we'll have to look at hiring our own videographer.
Oh, that's in the strategic plan.
It is.
Okay.
So the one question I did have that occurred to me later is, back then, we ordered a ton of the student handbooks, and if the school could call us and say, I need, 30, and we would ship it off to them. So, but again, those are kind of going by the way of the dinosaur, so I don't know that that's necessary anymore. We can make them in a format that's easily printable, though. I wouldn't go with the booklet style, maybe that, well, no, I guess that actually worked. When we printed them, they had a staple and folded. But actually, when this format here, you can just print it on regular paper. So I think, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the booklets are nice when we are at an outreach event, because it's kind of a nice make and take.
Yeah, that's true. We could do both. Really. You have
But primarily, I can see it making available both ways, but I don't know that I want to ship a bunch of stuff out. Yeah, not when everybody can print and download it
That's
at
very
this
true.
point in time.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what, like, the website, what the dream was, was to have it that if you looked at the website, it would be going like through the booklet. So instead of creating one booklet, you could, and then you'd have a button on there where you say print out the whole thing if you want, but you would have the different links to the different subjects.
Right.
So
You can
we'll
talk-
have to work real closely
Yeah.
because,
Okay, that sounds good.
yeah.
So this is, so if we need, so sorry, yes, go ahead, Deb.
My question is of the organizations. You're on. My question is, so when you guys have all of these meetings, is there an opportunity if, in fact, the budget is what the budget is, but we still want Ms. Mattson to address the licensees in your organizations, is there an opportunity that she can come in, or do you offer an opportunity that she can come in live via the internet to give those presentations and capture them and become podcasts, as you had just suggested, and then they either stay live on your site for people to access, and then perhaps permission to let them be live on our site. I just think there's, Ms. Mattson came down to Fresno State and she gave a 2-hour presentation to incoming brand new students. We should have captured that, because a lot of what she said and a lot of the questions after we were finished, she goes, those are the same questions that get asked over and over and over. And it just seems like we're missing opportunities. We should have captured that on tape, and it isn't a big deal anymore. You can use your cell phone and then just upload it. And we would have captured it, and it answered so many questions. They had great questions, really good questions, and you can try and anticipate all day long what your presentation is going to be based on what you think people want to hear. But out of the mouths of babes are the best questions, and especially the new ones coming in. So it's telehealth. It's, what if I got a DUI? What if, I mean, these are questions that are pertinent to the new generation of students that are coming through, and not necessarily addressing more complicated things. It's pretty basic at the front end, and I think they need to be addressed. It's the same old, so I don't know if there are opportunities for the organizations so that you could put out, you know, to the universities, on X date, the executive officer of the BBS is coming to us live, and she can even take questions online. This is not something that can't be interactive. And that way we have done outreach to everybody, and then the organizations actually get to profile what they're doing at the same time. This is the national whatever, and we have live, and we'll be taking questions, and here she is, and we capture it. And it's live on your place, and it's live on our place. I just think it's fun to go places and stuff like that, but with the budget, I think that we could hit more places and more opportunities and that's why I'm asking, do the organizations at some of these symposiums and some of these conferences, do they have opportunities for live, interactive presentations?
And just to answer that, I would say the answer is yes. We just did one in April. The California Society for Clinical Social Work teamed up with USC, School of Social Work, and they got a grant, and they were able to video record my presentation.
Okay.
And the goal was to put it out on YouTube.
Yes.
And I know, I haven't seen it yet. Also, previous, we've done webinars with USC, and Darlene's not sitting in the room. It's, I would say, for about 4 years now, and staff would do that. They would answer questions, and then later it would show up on YouTube. Okay. So I think that the ability is there, but I think it's a good suggestion to plant the seed that, you know, the next conference is, you know,
Live from Sacramento.
Yeah.
Ms. Mattson, Executive Officer of the BBS.
Yeah, and I just did it. I did a 90-minute presentation at the CalPIC conference, just solely on what unprofessional conduct is.
Yes.
It was, well, A, I enjoy doing those things, and B, I think it was pretty well received. So
Very well received.
So we'll see. But yeah, I mean, just food for thought.
Do you guys have interactive presentations at any of your conferences? Are you planning to have?
Absolutely.
TV airs with CalPIC. Ms. Madsen came to our conference and spoke concerning unprofessional conduct, as she mentioned there. It was very interactive there with the people present, and fascinating, very engaging. And so that was a beneficial thing. I believe we videoed it, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not exactly sure the status of that and the availability of it, but that could be something As far as doing something interactive remote, we have not done that or thought to do it, I don't think. I'm not on the planning committee of putting that together, but I think that could be done.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, these days, I think it could be easily done, probably.
That would be great.
I say that easily done, technical person.
If you got 2 computers and Skype.
Rebecca Gonzalez, National Association of Social Workers, and Kim just mentioned a social work event where we did that. We haven't had that kind of presentation at one of our major conferences, but I think it's something we could think about, and it would be possible.
Okay, thank you. Everybody's budgets are getting tight, and that's just one way to bring a lot of information very cheaply and participate in more than less.
Okay. Any other comments? I still like my idea of video. I think it's actually a wonderful thing, just to, even have a little snippet of explaining to them about practicum sites and what they have to, to be aware of. And especially there's so much online school nowadays. So, you can only reach so much of the physical, brick and mortar school, faculty and whatnot. So I think, if we have a video and just to, inform the student that if you look for the practicum, you have to make sure that these are the criterias. And, and the hours that you need, you can wrap it up in there, in order to, be, fulfill the pre-requirement before you get your registration number, that kind of stuff. I think, it would be helpful. And I think it will reach more people, because of that. And especially for those coming out of state, they want to come to California and practice. So.
And your young people coming out now, they stream everything. That's where they get all of their information. It's not in a booklet. It's not in the office. It's on their phone. And they'll stream it just sitting on the bus. They could stream what it looks like for supervision. By the time they get off the bus,
then they know.
They're educated.
They're informed.
As long as they're Wi-Fi.
Yes. Hi, Mike.
Hi. I know, Kim, you've done numerous workshops at the annual conference on Road to Licensure, which everybody loves it. I'm just thinking out loud, and we can talk about this some more. We have, on the camp website, we have on-demand videos, mostly for continuing ed, not exclusively. Most of them are for a fee, but not always. Some of them are free. Now I think we have 60 courses on there, and I'm just thinking out loud, we can talk about it. I think we'd be interested if we could record something and post things on there and make it, promote it more for pre-license to look at some of these discussions or whatever we want to do. And then I know they started doing something recently. I haven't done it, but it's called Ask Camped. And Alon Montgomery and Anastasia Johnson did a 15-minute on Facebook, and people were typing in questions and they were answering them live. And Tron Leon is saying, let's get some more ideas and do more of that. So we're interested in this. We'll talk with you more about doing this. Absolutely.
No, I think it's a great idea.
Okay.
And if you don't like my face, we can get Steve out there.
And Mike, you gave me a big, good idea too. Maybe even some of the organization, if there's some video that you can even put it on your own website, because it's not really, I don't know if there's any trademark or royalty and whatnot, but I think that would be.
And we share those through Facebook. We're all connected, Facebook and stuff. So that's where, when we get videos, we put it out there so they can definitely distribute it that. We need the video production stuff in our office, so that's the big thing. So that's
my next ask.
Yeah.
My next ask.
Yeah. So, whether it's through interlinked, because we're all connected nowadays, it's like whichever link that, send you to whatever place, I think, just having that network is important.
It is.
Yeah.
That's a really good idea.
Yep.
I'm not sure this is appropriate right now because this isn't the, anyway, I'll just spit it out here. GVRs with CalPIC. As far as you were talking about the student information handbooks there, it'd be nice to have one for LPCCs. So obviously the timing did not catch us in that sense, but anything we can do to help to put that together, we would be glad to.
Oh,
Yes.
thank you.
That's
Yes.
awesome. Thank you so much.
Very good.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I like the idea of putting it online, but then having a link to the more formal
Exactly, yeah.
document there.
Because some people still like paper and want to read it.
Right,
Other people
right.
just want to hear it.
Right, but if you have
Okay.
it to where you can read it and look at
Read
it.
it and, yeah.
And then maybe have somebody talking it through.
Yes.
Your video there.
We can call for volunteers, organization now, right? So, so Christy, do you have enough information?
I think we have enough
to
information
proceed?
to move forward. We'll have to kind of narrow down, what exactly we want to start with in this videos, but, obviously something directed at students, and we could maybe do one that's more formal and then do some that are more of a speaking engagement with questions. As far as working on a more formal video, I worked with Cesar on like our exam restructure videos. He's an excellent coach, and he I think would be an excellent resource for. I don't know how busy you are, but right now, but we do have some resources to help us do a good job on that. So.
That's superb. So thank you so much. And I want to thank our stakeholders, the willingness to collaborate with us and offer your resources to really support this effort. So wonderful. And that's what makes our job fun. So thank you. So I think this is it, right? This is the end of our discussion. And any other suggestion for further agenda items? Agenda items.
I just
Kim,
wanted,
yeah.
so, heard all the discussion. The only thing that we have to bring back to the committee are the definitions. Does the committee wish to meet as a committee to look at those definitions? Or do we want, for one more meeting, or do you want us to bring it maybe to P&A to kick around and go there? Because I think we're done, for the most part, of the work. Because the outreach is going to be something that's ongoing, and we're going to develop, and we'll be, promoting and getting it out there. You've approved the regulation proposal regarding the temp staff agency, so I'm curious about your thoughts.
Except with one person, so I would echo the support to just take it straight to P&A. Instead of holding a meeting of the exact same people to do this thing, and then move it to the next committee, which is exactly the same people, and P&A.
But Betty, you're not on, are you
Well,
on?
Betty will be on P&A.
Oh, you will? Great. Oh, okay.
I'm on P&A.
Because we're going to need you
The
for the
chair is
LEP.
on the P&A.
We're going to need you for the LEP specific.
Yeah.
Yay.
So I'm thinking about, Roseanne, so during break, when we were talking about, the possible impact of, 93, and all the other, section of the law. So can you speak for that?
Yeah, it is, that's going to, what the actual bill to make the changes is going to look, like we're adding another setting as a definition that's going to reverberate throughout the law. So it's crafting the definitions, and then it's looking at each component of the law that references private practices, corporations, or exempt settings, seeing how the new definition plays into that. So it is going to be somewhat of a complex process to draft all that and to think about all the unintended consequences. So it just depends on if you want to continue that in this committee, or if you want to continue that through P&A. It may be a couple of meetings
So the next,
that worked out.
yeah, the next P&A meeting is August, you're probably right, August 24th. And then then we have one on the 19th of October. 24th might be a little soon, maybe. I don't know. I think we could get close.
I think it's really about, if staff have enough time, Roseanne and Christy have
Yeah.
enough time to look at, those definition and stuff. And,
What is your preference, ladies?
yeah.
I definitely vote for taking it to P&A. I just don't see us meeting again just to hash through definitions.
Right.
And especially since it sounds like it could even take a couple of revisions, I just think we move that forward to P&A.
Okay.
And
Is that okay?
yeah.
Maybe what we do at the August P&A is we start working on the LEP. and then get that kind of hammered out, because I don't think it's going to be, well, I could be misspeaking, but I think it might be easier to do that first, because we might have to do a couple of takes on that. But on the other ones, the other license types, I think we'd be able to get through those pretty quickly at one meeting.
I would think so, but I think it's what Roseanne was saying is all the areas that those definitions will affect.
Right.
Yeah.
Is where it might take a little more time and maybe more than one stab.
I agree, I
Yeah.
agree. Okay.
So knowing it might take 2 meetings to get through everything else, maybe 1, but maybe 2. It could be 2 P&As, or it could be exempt setting then to P&A. I think.
Yeah, so I wanna think, my inclination is that let's meet one more for the exempt setting, hash out everything, and it will make the P&A a little bit faster, and then we have double chance. And truly, if Roseanne and Christy, you think that, we really don't need it, we can cancel a meeting.
Also, if it's the same members, and if we do another exempt committee meeting, like with the board meeting, and then everybody's good with it, and it's all the same members, it doesn't have to go to, there's no rule that says it has to go to P&A. It can, if you want to at that time sunset the exempt committee and have it go to the October P&A, that would be fine, or, it's kind of flexible.
Yeah.
As long as it gets to board eventually.
So we have basically, the August P&A, and then the October P&A, and then in between we have the September we have the full board meeting, and then November we have the full board meeting. So we have 4 chances, to talk about this bill. So I think, it really, I honestly, I think it's you guys' call, because if the members are going to be the same, whether we meet with or without,
So if we waited till the September board meeting and we did exempt setting on the 3rd day, I feel like going with August maybe is a little soon in terms of the bill language. So maybe got me leaning to
Yeah.
those.
So take one of the September dates?
Yeah.
We can do that, because I think the board members have the 3 days blocked out. And if we're only talking about one topic, I think we can squeeze that in. Because the first day the 12th is definitely going to be discipline day. Business day will be the 13th. So it leaves the 14th kind of wide open. And I'll have a better idea of whether we need another license committee meeting this afternoon. So.
Well, let's, in that's, just in view of the time, so maybe we'll just, get in one more exempt setting, in September.
Mm-hmm.
Just so we can, more intimately discuss, the hash out, the thing, and then I think it will just make the P&A, in October faster.
Probably.
Yeah, hopefully.
So let's plan on the exempt meeting at least the morning of the 14th. Yeah, because I think we can work that out. But we'll do it at least either the 12th, the 13th, or 14th. But I'll try to.
And there's also always the chance that you can skip that P&A and go straight to the full board, in November.
Right.
So I think it's really about, just how you want to, kind of like play out your workload, and incorporating all the,
Kind of progress.
yeah. So let's just meet one more time and,
All
and
right.
then we'll go from there.
Okay.
All right. So we not just agenda, we solved the issue.
All that. So now your public
Okay.
comment.
Right, and then public comment for items not on the agenda. Okay, I see head shaking.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think it's time to adjourn. The time now is 10:43. And don't forget, 1:30, we have 1 o'clock, we have the License Portability Committee meeting. So hopefully we'll see you there. Thank you so much.